So I love to open these shows by reading back to my guest something that they've posted online. For you, I found a post that you did on X, the platform formerly known as Twitter, and you say this. It says, "The best way to tell whether a long-form story idea is worth pursuing, question mark, how many ands it has. The more times you can say this happened and this happened and this happened, the better the story." Okay, I absolutely loved that. Please tell us what you mean.
So ands are really narrative ands that connect one narrative strand of a story to a still larger one. And I learned this very early in my career from a Pulitzer Prize winning writer who then became, I was quite lucky, my first editor. I was working at an alternative weekly in Phoenix, Arizona, and he had won. His name was Rick Bars, and Rick had won a Pulitzer at the L.A. Times. And basically, what he said was, "Look, if you can say that in this story, I'm going to report that X happened, and then in addition to that, Y happened, and then in addition to that, Z happened, and then in addition to that, A happened. The more of those you can add up, the better your story will be overall." And what I have actually found over the years is it's completely true. Most newspaper stories or now news site stories, they tend to have 1 to 2 ands. This guy is cool and he did something. Most magazine pieces tend to have somewhere between 3 to 5 ands. And the books that I've published now, they only start to work once you can basically group ands together into thematic larger sequences where you're basically exploring the externality of what's happening across any event and sort of the internality, the internal motivations of what all these different characters are feeling. So the and rule is one that I've relied on now for more than 25 years.
So I know I'm going to talk to you about it later. So don't talk about it now, but I know you teach a class on storytelling. Okay. I want to ask you about that later. But do you also do any writing? You just sound, I've been researching you all week and I'm like, I want to take a writing workshop from Paul Kicks.
I offer one. So
Do you do that? That's what I wanted to know because I'm sure our listeners would want to know that too. Okay. When do you do these? How do we sign up? I'm really asking.
okay. So I do something that's called the Storytelling You, and it's a deep dive into how to tell long form stories. And I do it twice a year, and we've had people who've signed six-figure book deals for like north of $250,000. We've had people land in dream publications. We've had people start new businesses that are sort of like storytelling businesses based on what they've learned. People add like six and even seven-figure revenue streams. So we've been really successful with the Storytelling You.
I'm so excited to talk to you today because you do work in investigative journalism. I have found the best people that I talk to on the show are reporters that do long form pieces. I don't know if you know Taylor Lorenz, one of my favorite episodes that we did. I absolutely love her book. Your latest book is called You Have to Be Prepared to Die Before You Can Begin to Live. 10 weeks in Birmingham that changed America. Okay, Paul, set the stage for us. What was Birmingham like in the 1960s? And why did this location become so pivotal to the civil rights movement? Also, if you could talk to us about the Southern Christian Leadership Conference and who were the main players in it.
Yeah. So first, what was Birmingham? Birmingham at that point in time was the most violent, the most racist, the most segregated place in America, which was really saying something in the early 60s. Birmingham was a place where uh, the Ku Klux Klan castrated black men as a means to intimidate groups like the Southern Christian Leadership Conference from coming to try to stage any sort of protest or movement for equality. Birmingham was a place where cops routinely raped black women in their patrol cars. Birmingham was a place where people were disappeared in the jails. Like you just didn't hear from them or see them anymore. So CBS's Edward R. Murrow, just before King and the rest go down to Birmingham, he files a report from uh, sort of the core of the city as a way to try to understand why is this place so different from everywhere else. And he said to his producer as he left, I have not seen any place like this since Nazi Germany. So that was Birmingham, Alabama in 1963. So I think the first thing for your readers to excuse me, the first thing for our audience, for your listeners to understand is we should disabuse ourselves of the notion that uh, anything about this was going to be foretold, that success was in the offing. I mean, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference at that time, headed by Martin Luther King Jr., but really composed at that point in time of his deputies. Wyatt Walker as executive director, James Bevel as the director of direct operations, and this one pastor from Birmingham named Fred Shuttlesworth. Those four become the core four protagonists in this book. And from the outset, they did not think they could win in Birmingham. Let's sort of go through the reasons for why. First off, the SCLC was broke at that time. King and the rest, they had staged protests going back to 1955, 1956 in Montgomery. And from 1956 to 1963, they failed abysmally, excuse me. They really didn't have any victory. Now, a lot of people, when I've been out on book tour, they've said, but how can you say that when you look at like the Montgomery bus boycotts? That's absolutely true. The Supreme Court ultimately said that you could not segregate in Montgomery. However, by 1963, sort of the intransigence of the Klan, to a certain extent, the bullheadedness of the Montgomery local government, it found ways around that Supreme Court ruling. And so when journalists would go to to Montgomery, they would find that black people were once again sitting in the back of the bus. And I quoted one journalist who said, as if it was 1933 instead of 1963. So if you keep that in mind, everything that the Southern Christian Leadership Conference had done prior to Birmingham had not worked, which is a big reason why they were broke, which also begins to explain why they were sneered at by the press, not just that in the South, but that in the North. You see this over and over in so-called liberal New York outlets. And in addition to that, they were sneered at by their other civil rights colleagues. I mean, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee was something that started just a few years prior, really in Nashville in 1960 and headed by John Lewis. And the people beneath John Lewis, at this point in time that King is thinking of going down to Birmingham, they are writing him telegrams that say, you are a phony. You are not the leader of this movement. So they had no respect. They had no money. And if they go to Birmingham, they were sure they were going to die. In fact, King delivered a mock eulogy just prior to their arrival in Birmingham, basically telling his deputies that I'm not sure I'm going to live through this. And everybody in that room kind of thought it was like twisted and dark. Ralph Abernathy, King's best friend, would later say that was King's only way to really deal with what he saw as just overwhelming stress and assured death, which is just to kind of turn it into a sick joke. And that's what he did. So that's trying to frame up, I guess, what was happening at that point in time.